These are not the aircraft that show up in military parades, painted and polished for cameras that already know what they're looking at. These are the ones flight crews stop talking about after a certain number of missions, because the numbers stop meaning anything to people who count for a living. What you're about to see starts where deterrence ends and consequence begins. A missile finds the Su-25 low over the Donbass front line, and the impact throws smoke across the tail. The jet keeps flying. Minutes later, it taxis back onto its own runway under its own power. Engine still running, canopy still sealed. That's not luck. That's 755 kilograms of titanium welded around the cockpit in a shell 24 millimeters thick on the sides, built to stop a 12.7 millimeter round before it ever reaches the pilot's spine. Proportionally, that's more armor than the American A-10 carries, on a smaller frame, with a fraction of the reputation. The nickname sounds almost harmless. Frogfoot. Something you'd find in a pond, not over a battlefield. Nothing about it suggests a cannon platform strong enough to survive its own war. In March 2022, one of these jets came home with a man-pad scar torn into its rear fuselage, and Russian state television handed both pilots a medal for the landing, not the mission. The armor did exactly what the specifications promised on paper. A machine mocked for its name just carried 2 men through the precise moment its engineers designed it for, and neither pilot ever felt the missile that should have killed him. In 2022, Russia's Su-34 fleet was bleeding out. Forced to fly low, forced to fly close, the jets ran straight into Ukrainian manpads and mobile air defense, and by some counts a quarter of the pre-war fleet went down in the war's first year alone. The old munitions demanded proximity, and proximity was a death sentence. So the solution arrived in the form of a wing kit. The UMP strapped onto standard dumb bombs, turning a Fab 500 or a monstrous Fab 3000 into a glide weapon that releases 30-40 miles from the target, well outside most air defense envelopes. Losses dropped. Production quietly climbed back to roughly 50 replacement airframes. But the cost didn't disappear, it just moved underground, literally. A Ukrainian soldier described the result from inside a bunker that was supposed to be safe. Bombs falling 2 by 2 by 2, 8 in an hour. Thermobaric warheads turning shelter into a coffin. The jet stopped dying. The war didn't get any quieter. It just moved the dying to people who never carried a weapon at all. Before any of this, he was just a pilot with access, flying a Foxhound armed with the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal, Russia's hypersonic strike missile, at a base somewhere in central Russia. Then came the contact. A man introduced himself as a Bellingcat journalist, showed a press card, and offered $3 million, plus a promise of Western citizenship, for one thing, fly the jet, missile still attached, toward a NATO airbase in Constanța, Romania. The FSB later claimed the real plan was darker still. Air defenses would shoot the aircraft down mid-approach, manufacturing a provocation, and that handlers had even discussed poisoning the commander so his co-pilot could complete the flight alone. What gave the recruiter away wasn't tradecraft or surveillance, it was an accent. The pilot noticed an odd pronunciation of the letter G and stopped answering. Afterward, Russian state media aired the recordings as vindication. What's left once the theater fades is simpler and colder, an aircraft worth more than gold to both sides, and an entire international incident that hinged on nothing sturdier than how one man said a single consonant. At least 8. That's the confirmed count of Su-35S fighters Russia has lost since 2022, and one of those losses didn't come from Ukraine at all. In September 2023, near Tokmak, a Russian S-300 surface-to-air battery locked onto a target its own radar couldn't properly identify, and fired anyway. The missile found a Su-35S. Friendly fire on the aircraft Russia calls its best air-to-air platform in the entire war. That's the part worth sitting with. The same jet credited with the longest-range kills of the conflict, R-37M missiles reportedly reaching targets nearly 190 kilometers away, can be erased by its own side's radar, making one wrong guess in half a second. The implication runs deeper than a single accident. A fighter built to dominate beyond visual range, engineered to strike before an enemy pilot even knows he's targeted, still depends entirely on a machine somewhere else correctly telling friend from foe. Ukraine didn't need to touch this one. Russia's own air defense network did the job for them. Picture the airspace where Russia actually flies this jet, hundreds of kilometers behind its own front line, over Kursk, the Azov Sea, Crimea, territory Ukrainian air defense can't reach. Fewer than 30 Su-57s exist in the entire fleet, and that scarcity is the limitation. Russia cannot risk its only fifth-generation fighter in contested skies, so the aircraft built to duel F-22s over hostile territory has spent most of this war lobbing cruise missiles from safety, never proving the air superiority it was designed for. Then, in October 2024, the adaptation nobody predicted. Russia's own stealth combat drone, the S-70 Okhotnik, lost control and drifted 10 miles behind Ukrainian lines. Rather than let its classified guidance systems fall into Western hands, Moscow sent the one aircraft it trusted with the mission, a Su-57, penetrating defended airspace to shoot down its own robotic wingman with a short-range missile. A jet conceived to challenge America's best interceptors spent its most daring flight of the war, destroying a machine built by its own country, because losing secrets mattered more than losing distance from the fight. Eight to 10. That's the estimated number of fully airworthy Tu-22 M3 bombers Russia has left, out of a fleet that started this war with roughly 34 combat-ready airframes. The production line closed in 1993, so every backfire lost since 2022, whether to Ukrainian air defense, drone strikes on distant air bases, or simple mechanical failure, is gone permanently, with no factory anywhere on Earth able to build a replacement. What remains still flies missions, still launches Kh-22 and Kh-32 missiles at targets across Ukraine, aging airframes doing a young aircraft's job, because there's no alternative. Then came June 15, 2026. A Tu-22 M3 nosedived into the Siberian forest near Svirsk, and all 4 crewmen ejected and survived. On the very same day, on the other side of the planet, a B-52 crashed on takeoff at Edwards Air Force Base, and all 8 Americans aboard were killed. 2 superpowers, 2 Cold War bombers, 1 date. The Russian crew walked away from a burning fleet with almost nothing left to lose. The American crew did not survive a fleet everyone assumed was safe. The fact that matters isn't the Bear's age, decades in service, propeller tips moving faster than sound. It's that the production line stopped in the early 1990s, which means every Tu-95 MS lost in this war is irreplaceable, permanently. That's the cause behind what came next. Russian bombers sat parked at rear air bases, assumed safe, hundreds of kilometers from any front line, until Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb in June 2025 proved otherwise, smuggling attack drones deep into Russian territory and destroying 7 to 8 Tu-95s in a single coordinated strike. The consequence shows up on satellite imagery today. At Engels Air Base, ground crews painted 2-dimensional silhouettes of Tu-95s directly onto the tarmac, black cockpits included, hoping to fool targeting systems into wasting munitions on flat paint instead of aluminum and fuel. Commercial satellites see through the trick in seconds. A bomber fleet that helped define Soviet nuclear deterrence for 70 years is now being defended with a paintbrush, because the actual aircraft, once destroyed, simply stop existing, and nobody in Russia can build another one.